Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome to another session of working in UX design. And today we have a very, very special guest with us. His name is Isaac, and Isaac Lee has transitioned from payments into wealth tech and has spent a large part of his career working on hackathons, working in the financial services sector. And he has a problem of solving problems at scale, has a passion for solving problems at scale. My apologies. And he's definitely done a lot of work in the early days for Endowus, which is actually a investment platform for people to invest their CPF, which is one of the government supported schemes in Singapore, as well as to invest their cash as well for the future, right? He has done everything from revamping a wealth tech app to overhauling its customer service workflow to even onboarding uh, investors onto the platform itself. So today we will be discussing about wealth tech, and we will be talking about the process of managing not just digital products, but also the services that surrounds it, which is kind of something that is very, very holistic, right? Because when we talk about financial services, it's not just about the digital products, it's not just about the app or the website itself. So I'm really, really glad to have Isaac here with me today. And we'll be covering several topics, including product innovation at a growth stage company, which is Endowus, as well as building a career in FinTech and going to market in what is the go-to-market motions for different countries. So Isaac, glad to have you here this evening. How are you feeling?
Hey Dylan, thanks very much for the generous intro. I do want to say that it's great that you guys are all spending your evening here together with us. Hope you guys can take away something from this. But I do want to start off by saying like I'm hoping that this is like a little bit of a more interactive and casual session that hopefully you guys can get something out of. I mean, when we talk about wealth tech and we talk about the innovations in wealth tech, there's a lot of things we can zoom into. So if you guys have something that you're specifically curious about, feel free again to put it in the chat and I'll try to answer as best I can from my perspective. Yeah.
Certainly. So I think it was going to be a very interactive one. So I'm going to start with a few general questions just to get the ball rolling. You spent quite a large part of your career in the financial services sector, right? What excites you about this space? Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, Singapore being like a financial hub, right? It's really core to a lot of the businesses that exist in the country. And not just that, I think particularly when we talk about wealth tech, it's very personal to you as an individual, right? I think when we think about financial planning, it's really about how do we support people's lifestyles and their goals in life and how to achieve them. So
Mm.
for me, being a fresh like working adult in Singapore, I really care about like how am I going to invest for my own future as well. So a lot of the products that I work on or like I get the chance to interact with are kind of relevant to me as an individual as well, which then becomes like very interesting problems to solve, right?
Mm. Today you work as a senior product manager for Endowus, which is like a growing startup, scaling startup. How did you decide to choose product management as like your career?
Yeah. So actually, product management, I kind of fell into it almost accidentally. I didn't really know about the product management career in university. There was no like product management course or anything like that. I think originally the idea is that I wanted to work in finance, like the vanilla version of finance, which is like, your financial planning, your investment
Like
banking and
investment
all.
banking,
Yeah, all
yes.
those like financial bro kind of like perspectives. But the more I kind of explored it, the more I realized that there's a lot of inefficiencies in the industry because of the legacy of how it came to be, and the issue with people really accessing the type of advice that is necessary to grow your wealth, right? There's a lot of noise in the industry as well, which is where like I felt technology was going to be a major player in changing the landscape of the industry. So what I ended up doing was doing a bunch of hackathons in university. I mean, the money was pretty good as well. Like these hackathons, when you're a kid, you're like, oh, a couple of K is pretty nice. But what incidentally happened as well is because when you get the chance to work on a lot of different problem statements and introducing tech as an intervention to solve those problems, these are kind of skill sets that are super relevant for like UX designers and product managers as well. So actually, my first job in product management was from a hackathon that got me into the payments industry, which then led me to where I am today.
Well, that's such an awesome story. And I guess you only make money from hackathons if you win it. So I'm guessing you won a lot of hackathons.
Yeah, we did pretty well. We did pretty well. Yeah.
Okay, that's awesome. Did you work did you come to get like came in with your own team, or did you like had random people joining your team?
So we started off with like a bunch of people from the same university club that I was in. So I was
Mm,
in this club called SMU FinTech, and
nice.
we just made friends there with a bunch of guys, and that became like the core team, which had people come in and out as we
Awesome.
worked on like different hackathons. Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like pretty early on in your career, you already knew fintech or financial services was the way to go. Um, and I would say it's an excellent choice because as you said, Singapore is a financial services hub and one of the top few in the world. But Singapore is also known for many different industries. And it's so interesting that now you're in Endowus and you're scaling Endowus, which has started from Singapore and scaling it to different markets and verticals. So I'm just wondering, as a product manager, what kind of problems do you work on, say on a month-to-month basis? Yeah.
So I think for my personal case, I've been very fortunate to be part of a very rapid growth cycle in the company. So originally, when I was brought into Endowus, is to really figure out how do we scale the financial advisory aspects of things. Like we have a very small team, and the intention is to serve a large amount of clients, right? So with that, how do you make sure that the support teams are able to scale together with the technology and together with the growth of the company? So the very first objective I had was to really sort out the support systems and how those things would funnel to the right people, so that whenever you give a call to Endowus or whenever you send an email, the right person receives it and is able to respond in a very quick turnaround time, right? Um, so that was the first problem that I was kind of thrown into. And then as the problem changed over time and we got sort of those infrastructures in place, then we started looking at the user funnel and okay, where was the biggest gap we were looking at, right? So then I was lucky enough to be placed in the onboard team, which is really looking at the first acquisitional aspect of clients when they enter into the app, which is basically trying to get them to finish up their KYC and get their account approved. Today, where I sit is under the activation wing of the company, which is basically trying to figure out how to get people to make their first investments. So people who have gone through the effort of onboarding with the platform, giving us the personal information to make sure they have all the KYC documents in place. Now, how do we get them started in the best way possible with Endowus and kick off that journey? So it's a very exciting problem to solve, and obviously one of the more challenging problems, I would say, because where you want to start is very personal to you and your stage in life and your wealth situation. So a lot of the problems that come about are really to do with, how do we make sure that the platform is relevant for you personally as an individual, rather than just being a good platform in general, right? I'm sure like many people know there's plenty of good platforms out there, but how do we make sure that when we position our solutions to you, how do we make sure that it's you understand why it's relevant to you personally?
Yeah. And I think personally, I have been a early Endow Us user. So I have first invested my CPF money in it, and then I subsequently did some cash. And I'll also comment that the user experience is good because it's very smooth and it's very easy to understand as well. So I think great job over there. I'm sure the platform has gradually evolved over time. And I think you as a product manager, you've scaled yourself, right? You've also grown working initially on more customer support problems. and now on a very, very different kind of challenge, which is activation. And I remember we were having coffee and speaking about this a couple of months ago, and I understand that you don't just work on the digital side of things. In fact, you do look at the service design side of things as well. Could you share a little bit more about those aspects?
Yeah, so this is something that I'm particularly passionate about because I think when we think about product management, there's a tendency to over-focus on just the digital app as the core experience that everyone is going to experience with the company, right? And to be fair, if you are a very product-centric company, and that's the main interaction you're going to have with 99% of your clients, that's a good place to focus on. But particularly because wealth management is so personal, and because of the way in which people are used to interacting with wealth management, it's not just an online experience, right? We also have offline advisors. We also have a very, very large investment management team that goes out and reaches out to, our partners in the fund manager side and also client advisors that reaches out to other organizations and other like family offices and things like that. And tries to bring the investment experience in an augmented way to them, not just purely through the digital means. So when you have a situation like that, the important thing to take into account is that the first interaction that they have is not with the platform, it's with the person who's interacting with them. And you want to enhance that person's ability to deliver the right content and the right information to these stakeholders or to these clients, potential clients, as much as possible. So in practical sense, what that means is that you need to be able to equip them with the right systems, processes, and information so that they can easily do this at scale, right? Our advisors are not just, managing 10 clients each. They're managing close to 100 or 200 clients. So you can imagine the amount of workload that they will have to do if they were managing this on an Excel or if they were managing a Google Doc of the pipeline of clients that they are talking to. So we did a lot of work, or at least like me and the team got to do a lot of work around how do we ensure that the outreach is done at scale while still keeping the personalized experience intact, right? I think a lot of the learnings that we had was that for particularly higher net worth clients or particularly larger clients that are looking to deploy wealth, it is not easy to expect them to do this self-serve, right? They're not going to be just, here's $100 million and I'm just going to assume your system works. They want a clear explanation about how it works, what are the stakeholders involved, what are the controls that you have, and what are the details of the products you're expecting me to be able to engage in your platform. So it's a very collaborative effort. Obviously, this is front and center, the client advisory team leading these initiatives. But as a product manager, what my role was to really try to look at tools and systems that we can do to support this team and let them fly and let them engage with these clients as best they can.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. And just kind of like to dive a little bit more. I'm not sure during your time working, um, could you maybe name an example where, let's say, a insight from service design or an observation from service design played like a really big role in terms of determining the entire customer journey, or even like on the platform itself. Yeah.
Yeah. So actually, one of the really interesting insights we got was that the call to action that we give to clients to buy a product was not effective, right? Especially for the high net worth clients. So when you receive emails as a high net worth client, and the call to action there is just to buy a product, a lot of people are very, very skeptical about whether or not they will want to engage the platform. But when we swap that CTA to call an advisor and have a conversation, the take-up rate or the click-through rate increased significantly, right? So it's almost like providing them the channel to engage with a person was the UX intervention there, right? Rather than trying to get them to do things on their own. And I think that level of comfort by swapping just a simple CTA and the degree in which that improved the click-through rate or engagement with our emails was very, very, very insightful for us.
Yeah, I really love how data-driven you guys are. And I think that also speaks in the platform itself, like looking at how much projection if you invest this much every month versus like other months. And I was just wondering, like, based on the example that you shared earlier on the call to action bit, which I understand, which is on the digital side of things, how much influence do you have on, say, how the advisor reaches out to the customer, right? And then how did they then transition back to the digital side of things? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, the the good thing about Endowus is honestly, a lot of people here are very good at what they do. So what we try to do is not to like prescribe what the experience should be from the advisor's point of view, right? The advisors themselves should be the ones to shape the experience and to own the experience. What then happens in translating that to the platform is we need to make sure that that experience is consistent. So when we provide information on the app around an investment product and the metrics we use to communicate how good this product is, that needs to line up with the advisory of what's being presented to the client, right? So for example, like we actually take a look at, for example, the presentation decks that they use to provide this advisory to their clients, and we ask them, okay, why are you guys using these metrics instead of other metrics to show return, for example, or volatility, for example? And we're trying to understand why certain metrics make sense for a specific demographic and then might not be applicable to everyone at scale. So interestingly, when we look at different demographics, there's not really a lot of difference in terms of how complex they are in their financial knowledge. Actually, the data that we see is that how financially savvy you are is really more to do with your profession rather than to do with your seniority or your wealth group or anything in general, right? And what we try to look at is, okay, so this works on an offline advisory mode where people might have a certain like bias towards being used to this offline advisory. Are we sure that this is also going to translate to the platform at scale? That's something that we as product managers have to think about and control. Because even though offline advisors are really great at shaping their own offline advisory experience, translating then that onto the platform, we really need to be conscious about if we're over catering to a biased or specific audience that might be going to these offline advisors rather than other people that might discover us like organically or in other forms. Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing these insights, and it really got us to start thinking about like what really happens on a month-to-month basis or day-to-day basis in your role. And earlier you mentioned there's actually a lot of competition in the investment space, right? We know of other startups as well who allows people to invest in their platforms. We also know some are more focused on the stock market, for example. Some are more focused on funds. And there's also the digital banks, which are also trying to attract customers to put in sums of money into their bank and to invest these sums of money. So, given the banks and digital banks are spending so much on innovating, what kind of innovation is Endowus as a startup pushing for?
Yeah, so I think a lot of these organizations are really trying to recognizing the need to look at players like Endowus and seeing what we're doing in order to see how they can innovate and adapt to changing consumer expectations, right? And a lot of them are also looking at very large industry changing technologies. Like I'm sure every conference you've gone to probably has talked about AI to some degree, or machine learning or blockchain or a lot of these buzzwords. And I think it's important that these organizations do invest in these technologies to really figure out how we can incorporate them at like the industry level, right? For Endowus particularly, I think we're kind of at a stage where we're not just thinking about these technologies as overall projects or tools to use within the company. We're really thinking about the speed of innovation that we can achieve with not just these tools, but in these tools as well. So a very good example is we just had a discussion today about whether or not the AI we're using is even fast enough for this particular use case, right? We know it's good. We know AI is fantastic, but if we have a very specific use case where the feedback needs to be very real time, is this even like the kind of model that we want to adopt as, for our particular use case? So we're kind of thinking along those lines of innovation, like really trying to drill down to a very specific practical application of these tools. And the big guys are really doing a lot of very interesting experiments out there. But what we care is about how do we translate that into value for our clients in the near term as well, and applying these technologies in that way. Yeah.
Yeah, I almost feel like you have I almost feel like you have to know what your investment banking colleagues or wealth management colleagues are thinking, and then you have to kind of like also be aware and cognizant of all the Gen AI use cases and what it can do and what it can't do, and then balancing that all along like the entire customer journey, and making sure that that can be delivered at scale. So yeah, it doesn't sound like an easy job to me. Would that be accurate?
I mean, what product job is easy, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I once heard a quote that, there are two ways to make the most impact in a company, and one is in product management, and the other is in sales, right? So it looks
Mm.
like you're in a very, very impactful role. And I'm also quite well aware that your CEO is quite involved in the digital development process. So maybe for some product managers who are working with their CEOs, they might want some advice. How do you work better with your CEO, especially when he or she is so involved in the product process? Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, Greg's a fantastic guy. He's a product-centric guy for sure. He used to be a product manager himself. So he has a very, very strong view on a lot of things. And he does think with a very product mentality about how do we scale certain systems and how do we make sure that things are delivered, to clients in a user-centric way, right? I think working as a product manager who has such an engaged CEO, what your job is to really look at the gaps in which he can't see, right? So as a CEO, a lot of their view is very much on the company strategy level and how things fit into their specific OKRs or the objectives of the company and sort of the overall strategic objectives of the firm. Where you kind of sit as maybe someone in a more junior role or someone who's maybe a step, one or two steps below that, is really looking at interesting initiatives and technologies in the space that you can then align with the overall direction of what needs to be achieved on a corporate or like on an organizational level. Practically speaking, what that means is that you need to translate his wants into things to do, right? So if we want to explore, say, the Gen AI space, and we believe that that's impactful to achieve a platform at scale, what does that practically mean in terms of the initiatives that we want to focus on, right? And as a CEO who's involved in the product, a lot of his time is also thinking about CEO things, not just product things. So it's not like he has a lot of time to drill into things. So presenting that information and communicating that clearly on why this is the way to go is very important as well as a product manager, and interacting with stakeholders in general, right? Why are we pursuing this particular initiative over others with such a limited resource? And how does that feed into the overall company objective or company OKRs? So a lot of our job is, one, translating the wants into specific objectives, and then from those objectives, also communicating that upwards in a meaningful way that aligns with the overall company vision. Yeah.
Yeah. Those are some really, really good tips, especially knowing that startup CEOs are generally very strapped for time, or even CEOs in general are very, very strapped for time. And that means the product team has to be able to support the CEO better and to be able to kind of translate that vision, and to look at the underlying technology and even like prioritization, for and against case, to ensure that things are built right with given the limited resources. And I seem to remember when I first started using Endowus, it was very, very much focused on sort of like the consumer side of things and very much on about CPF, very much about funds. Like today, I think Endowus has moved into wealth management, it has moved to helping other investment funds as well. So it looks like there is quite a lot of different go-to-market activities on different verticals. So I'm very curious from your perspective, being in a high-growth startup and as a senior product manager, how do you think about go-to-market?
Yeah. So, I mean, when you're scaling a business, there's a lot of different things you can do. And that sometimes is a little bit of a wild, like, backlog of things that, people want and sort of the different stakeholders involved in trying to drive different initiatives. Right? So when we think about things like go to market, usually we think about it in the context of expanding to new regions or expanding into new markets within the same region, right? Um, and the key question is always to ask whether or not the skill sets that the organization currently has is translatable into that new market or into that new service line, right? There's a lot of different things that we need to balance between doing what we're good at and doing something new. So and a lot of that sometimes has to do with practically what are your people even good at doing in the first place, right? So when you look at our product team and you look at the kind of people that we have in it, a lot of us have to do a lot of learning to really know about a new market or a new industry that we want to enter into, to be able to start prioritizing between that and the other initiatives. Because as a scale up or a startup, you also have your core product that you still need to look after, right? So Singapore for us, like taking a step back, when Endowus started with CPF investing and cash investing and SRS, a lot of it was very localized and very focused on, okay, what's the simplest way to deploy these different buckets of wealth to help people grow that wealth, right? Now we have like a huge product suite of different types of products from, private wealth, hedge funds, and private markets. We have, different advisory tools that we're trying to introduce. We have a lot of different investment solutions that has expanded the menu. So there's a lot of desire to also clean up the existing platform while also trying to pursue new markets, while also trying to pursue like different industries and different verticals, right? So how does the product manager navigate that? For me personally, and I think it comes back against to the firm's objectives, right? The firm is always going to have near-term objectives and long-term objectives. I think we're kind of at a stage where we are very confident that Endowus is here to stay, and we're envisioning ourselves in the long run to really be that platform that's an institution to help people engage these various buckets of wealth, private pension, public pension, and your own personal savings, right? But in the near term, we need to hit certain objectives as a firm to grow certain verticals to a state that we can say, all right, that's pretty stable before we even think about moving on to other more platform-wide activities. So in the near term, there's going to be objectives that you're going to have to fulfill that are more tactical or relevant to the immediate OKRs. A very good example is now if you see our advertisements, they're all about SRS because it's SRS season, right? And if you want to save on your tax, invest your SRS, blah, blah, all that. But in the long term, we're also working with a lot of tools that you don't see yet because they are very much things that we need to rapidly experiment with and to refine before we introduce into the wider market. So we have a lot of offline tests or like within company tests that we do to even figure out if a particular vertical is worth pursuing, right? There's a lot of very great discussion, like good discussions that happens within the company about whether or not this thing is worthwhile, like investing our time and money in before it even reaches clients, which kind of goes against that philosophy of fail fast. But when you're looking at large investments with an uncertain return, that's kind of, you need to do a little bit of measurement before you're able to, justify this to the stakeholders and justify it to the rest of the team that, hey, this is where we kind of want to go and pursue.
Yeah. I'd just like to make a very small comment because like as I hear you speaking about it, about your go-to-market motion, it almost feels like the mindset of a hedge fund manager or someone managing a portfolio, right? Because you're kind of like measuring and the risk and potential return of each feature and each each fund that you're going to invest in, and then you're kind of like determining, hey, which one should you prioritize. So it almost feels like, yeah, I mean, if you're ever going to make a career switch back to investment banking or managing a
Man.
fund and all that, I think it does sound like it will be a smooth transition. But it's just so interesting that you mentioned those things because I learned I had a portfolio management class back in business school, and that was exactly what they taught us, right? Like, and I'm just wondering, is there a ratio in your mind, or is it more like some product managers work on more innovation related stuff, and some product managers work on the existing products? Is there like a ratio where people like how do you balance, the
Mm.
time just from a time perspective, not a cost perspective, from a time perspective on existing products versus like new use cases, new technology. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think in general, the idea is that for product managers or like for the product team, you want to stay ahead of the development curve in general. So I mean, to put it frankly, everyone in Dallas innovates, right? There's no like just doing your day-to-day job and kind of expecting things to kind of like be all right. Everyone's like super hungry and continuously innovating on different aspects of the business and different business lines. But I think what we try to do as a product team is in general try to stay ahead of the development curve at least one or two sprints so that we can, do the user interviews, do the design questions, do the problem statement or problem validations before we even commit any kind of resource on the technical side to these initiatives. And what that means as a product manager is that you need to get familiar with a lot of tools that allow you to trial these experiments very, very quickly and very scalably, right? There's a lot of A/B testing tools out there that people didn't used to have access to before. They are now widely available and very intuitive to use that we leverage quite a bit. There's a lot of things like feature flags and stuff that you can deploy without having to utilize any technical resource. Now, coming back to the question about how do we balance that in terms of the ratio of time, right? I don't think there's like a magic number per se. You're always trying to pursue new initiatives and new projects that might drive innovation and have impact in the company. How that is prioritized is again back to, okay, what's the ROI that we would get out of spending our time working on this experimenting rather than working on an incremental improvement onto the platform, right? And that's very much tied with, again, the objectives of the business and where we are today in the short-term goals. I think long-term goals and sort of where we envision ourselves in the future is always going to take a little bit of a backseat compared to the nearer term objectives. But you would have maybe like a small stream of resource or like maybe 10% of your own personal time to think about what are these like longer term objectives to fulfill.
Yeah. I think just gleaning from the conversation that we had, the fact that you guys are looking at Gen AI and looking at the speed of how Gen AI is developing and what are the new use cases you can bring into wealth management, that the fact that you mentioned that already really excites me because there is just so much innovation happening around that. And to offer it at a level of accuracy, to offer it at a level of quality advice that one would expect from a known financial advisory firm. I think that's incredibly exciting, and I'm looking forward to what you do with it. I also understand that Endowus is not just in the Singapore market. Are there other markets that you guys are actively looking into or have already expanded into? Yeah.
Yeah, so we're in Hong Kong. We had sort of a revamp of our launch of the app in Hong Kong earlier this year, where we're now able to offer private market products on the platform as well as basically the entire suite of Endowus services in Hong Kong that was originally more of like a pilot launch in the previous year. So Hong Kong has been a very, very interesting learning experience for us. I'll just talk a little bit about some of the interesting cultural differences that you see. You hear about Singapore and Hong Kong, both financial hubs, both based in Asia, both like Asian tigers. And it's easy to assume that a lot of things are very similar to each other. Maybe on a macro lens, they are. But when you look at the culture and the history behind the different societies and how they look at wealth, That is actually very interestingly very different between the two different cultures, right? Sometimes it's due to, family circumstances. Sometimes it's very much tied to the the cultural zeitgeist of the current period, right? On what's popular in each region. So when we expanded to Hong Kong, I think we had a lot of assumptions about how we think it would be different, and also a lot of assumptions about how we think it would be similar. And I think we got a lot of things wrong on both sides when we entered the market. But now with the revamp, I think we're reaching a little bit more of a matured thinking of adapting the platform for Hong Kong as well.
Yeah. So for the benefit of our audience, I'm going to ask you a follow-up question. That of course it's comfortable for you to share publicly. Like, what was one assumption you had about Hong Kong that was wrong and that you had to correct in order to localize the platform properly for Hong Kong? Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, it was more like a question of priority and resource as well, how we wanted to start in Hong Kong. I think a lot of the assumptions we made early on was that like Hong Kong people love choice and love to make decisions themselves. And hence, offering them more choice or that lens of choice was sort of like the start of how we wanted to enter into the market. But then as we realized on how people were interacting with the app, we saw that people were looking for answers as well, right? I think in Singapore we're very trusting about our advice that we get from other people, and we thought that that maybe wasn't as important in Hong Kong, but actually everyone kind of looks to professionals for advice, right? I mean, in hindsight, it's pretty obvious, but like the initial thesis was that because they're more self-driven, they would be a little bit more self-serve or be a little bit more exploratory in nature. But the reality is that you know everyone kind of likes professionals to guide them along the way, and we've now needed to adapt the platform to really like shift to providing that guidance for people in Hong Kong as well, which is why we recently launched our flagship portfolio in Hong Kong. Which again, if you're looking for the first thing to start with, we always say, hey, maybe take a look at flagship. By the way, short disclaimer, this is not financial advice. In case anyone, like takes it as
Yeah.
such.
Yeah.
Yeah, otherwise my complaints.
Please don't take the podcast as financial advice. But it is an opportunity to check out the customer experience that Endowus has to offer. That's such an interesting insight. Thank you for sharing that. And when I was working in the Hong Kong market, I had a lot of assumptions as well, and it turned out to be quite different, and not what I expected. For example, I was doing user interviews in Hong Kong in English, and I would get a certain type of response. And then my colleagues would do it in Cantonese, and they would get wildly different responses. Like it was more nuanced. There was like more character to it. So I think it's such an interesting market when you're building a product or when you're going to market in an entirely new country with like new culture involved. So I think from our conversation, I'm really getting a sense that you're quite a data-driven guy, and you have this like approach to solving problems in a very logical fashion. And I'm aware that you also actively mentor and share your PM knowledge in school. So
Mm.
my follow-up question is like, our school system trains us in a certain way, right? Like we're trained to accept certain frameworks. We're trained to accept certain ideas and not to question them, not to test our lecturers, and not to like try and solve problems that have not been solved before. So I'm just kind of wondering how are you mentoring people and challenging them to think in a more critical manner so that they are prepared to do the role of a product manager. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think, I mean, I wouldn't discredit the Singapore education system that much, but I will say that there's a lot of truth in, people following certain frameworks of what it means to start in the industry, particularly. I think everyone has like, oh, get a good internship, do lots of interviews and try to just get good grades and try to enter into the industry. And I think in the current state in which we're in as a society, and also as the fact that there's so much resources being poured into tech, that narrative is quickly drying out very fast for a lot of people who are facing the realities of doing a job search. So the real motivation on why like I'm quite involved in the mentoring space, particularly for students and fresh grads, is because really a lot of people aren't getting the kind of exposure that they might necessarily need to have an edge to enter into an industry. So what I try to focus on when it comes to critical thinking is to try to get them to think about what are the problems that they think we are trying to solve, and then how would they try to solve that as well, right? Um, then part of that mentoring process is also to inform them about the types of problems that we actually care about on a day-to-day basis, and also in the long term, and then educate them about the different aspects of, like, for example, the wealth tech business or wealth management business that you wouldn't really typically get in school. Things like, what are the sales practices that are kind of on the ground that other firms are competing against, like a firm like Endowus with, that we find maybe against our philosophy, but we need to know that these things exist because they shape the expectations of clients and sort of what they expect as well. So aspects like these are things that we try to share with students to really get them a flavor of what the industry is like and what to be conscious of when trying to apply, or who to apply with as well, to hopefully give them an edge or give them some insight to how to get
Mm.
started in the industry. Yeah.
Yeah, I really appreciate that you're spending extra time outside of your very, very busy work schedule to do that. And that's incredibly um, exciting to also know that students shouldn't just like follow what they're being prescribed in school, but should challenge themselves to think a lot deeper about problems. I'm just wondering, other than say engaging in a mentor session with mentors like yourself, getting an internship, which I believe most students do that, or even reading. If I'm a fresh graduate, if I'm a student today and I'm trying to do FinTech, right? Is there anything else I can do to stand out from a sea of candidates that are equally like hungry and are very, very aggressive in getting into
Yeah.
the industry?
So this is the exact question that I think a lot of students have as well. It's like, okay, how do I stand out from the crowd, right? I think this is going to be based on my personal bias experience as a guy who's gotten to start a career in hackathons, is to really try to go for competitions or hackathons where you can showcase your problem solving abilities. And if you win, that's also like a huge like green flag for employers, because like, okay, this guy has actually thought about things critically and applied it to a problem that people have recognized and found some value in. So hackathons and competitions are a great way to get exposure. I don't think they run as well as they used to be honest. It's a lot less exploratory and a lot more specific in what they're looking for in hackathons. But that's a great way to get exposure. Also volunteer, right? If you volunteer and solve problems for social good organizations, a lot of those organizational problems are also translatable to places in the corporate field. So that's why volunteering is something that I'm a strong advocate for as well. You're not only contributing back to society, you're also learning a lot of valuable skill sets that you wouldn't otherwise have been able to get exposure to in the commercial space. And honestly speaking, with the amount of reskilling that's going on as well in the social space, there's very talented people in there that can really impart a lot of very good technical knowledge that you wouldn't get access to in your day-to-day corporate life, right? So that's something that I strongly encourage students to do, as well as even other working professionals.
Yeah, so just going to ask for more specific resources. Would that be one hackathon you would recommend, for example?
Okay, I would never recommend a specific hackathon, but I would
Okay.
say keep a pulse on what hackathons are out there, right? I
Mm,
think a lot of those that look for innovative applications of technologies are relatively
mm,
more interesting than people trying to solve like very specific organizational issues. Um, so
okay.
yeah, I think that's kind of a better place to play around with
Yeah, that makes
than
sense.
others. Yeah.
And I think earlier we had a very brief chat that you're also part of this organization called Better.sg. Which you are volunteering for social good as well. Would you mind sharing a little bit more about the organization and how the problems you have worked on has helped you as a product manager? Yeah.
Yeah, so actually Better.sg is one of the most active tech for good communities in Singapore. It's a ground up initiative, purely made by volunteers and run by volunteers as well. Has a little bit more organizational structure in the recent years. And the idea was that we just wanted to create a space where like-minded individuals can come together and can leverage on technology to solve social issues, right? There's like a huge amount of members in there right now, and a lot of very, very talented and senior members in there as well. One of the very good examples of problems that we were trying to solve was, donor management systems today are very, very opaque in how they work and who is the right provider to go with, right? So as a charity, you collect donations both online and offline. There's a tax implication to that. There's a processing overhead that's involved in that as well. And then you also have the advent of all these new technologies like PayNow and Payla and all these like fast payment systems. How do you tie that together with a management software that is still operatable by maybe people who are not so technical today? Like even IRS has a mandate recently where they want all these charities to digitize. And that's where, a tech for good organization kind of steps in and says, hey, we have the technical expertise to maybe help you navigate this space a little bit better for your specific organization and the kinds of collections that you are involved with. And that has been very interesting for me personally because you get to see how different organizational needs translate to different requirements from a provider, right? Like someone who only deals in online donations, for example, might not need a way to scalably log their offline donations with OCR or some kind of technology like that, right? And applying that to the stuff that I do on a day-to-day is basically, what makes sense for online does not make sense for offline, right? So necessarily. So that has been like, I think one of the real big learnings I took away from my time volunteering Better.sg. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of projects going on every day. So it's a very exciting space to be in just to see what other people are doing as well.
It sounds really interesting. I'm just going to ask a follow-up question, and that's slightly personal because it sounds like you're working quite a number of things, including like mentoring, including like at Better.sg, and then you have on top of that you have a full-time job. How do you kind of like I guess balance all of those things and
Yeah,
still keep yourself sane, right? Like, I mean, this is more like from a life point of view, right? Like, how do you achieve
yeah,
a
yeah.
sort of balance? Yeah,
Yeah, some of my colleagues also ask me, it's like, do you have a life, right? I think personally speaking, I enjoy doing these things anyway. So a lot of these activities are kind of almost like what I do in my downtime for fun, right? And solving these issues for fun. But I think there is an important need to talk about self-regulation and how you make sure that you're still staying sane. A lot of people maybe take very long holidays or very like sporadic trips throughout the year and stuff like that. Um, for me, I kind of just try to balance it out with how I can fit my life into other people's lives as well to try to like balance out that time. Um, it's important to prioritize personal life as well. Like I'm not gonna say like, oh yeah, this is all that I do in life, right?
no, I don't think you should.
Yeah.
Neither should you do that in an interview. I think one of the distinctive things that really stand out for me, even though you don't exactly say it in words, it's like how passionate you are about financial services, right? Or even product and using product mindset, right, to solve um, complex problems and complex challenges. It almost feels like your tonality and that you light up when you speak about it. I'm just wondering, because it's such a tough job market right now, right? Especially in tech, and I think passion plays such a big role in making an impression. Do you have any tips around that, like talking about talking about your passion, or
Mm.
maybe you're doing it naturally? I just wanted to point out to you. It's just wondering if you have any tips for people to kind of like really showcase that, right, and not just like say,
Yeah.
"Hey, I'm really passionate about fintech. Please hire me," right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it comes back to at its core, be genuine, right? I mean, if you're really passionate about problems, try to work in industries that kind of solve those problems. and it just gives you that little bit of an edge to push through, right? But in terms of communicating this passion, right, it's really about a show don't tell situation. I think if you tell people it's like, yeah, man, I'm so passionate about personal investing, the first thing that pops into people's minds is like, okay, why, right? Why are you passionate about it in the first place? I can tell you very, very clearly why I'm passionate about it because I've seen enough people make mistakes of investing their own wealth into very, very strange thesis and arguments before, and it's always been an issue where it's like, okay, there's got to be a better way to go about this, right? I mean, so many people have done it right, but so many people still get it wrong. So there's got to be some balance in there somewhere. Um, so things like that, and being able to communicate that idea distinctly, particularly during interviews, is probably going to give you an edge over other candidates who are just going to say, "Oh yeah, I live and breathe fintech." And it's like, okay,
What does that even mean?
yeah, yeah,
Exactly. So yeah, I think that's really, really good advice. And I think it's quite hard to fake passion.
yeah.
So if you don't mind sharing, what does Endowus look for in its new hires, right? Or in its job candidates?
Yeah, so I mean, I can't speak for like other hiring managers or like the other departments in general, but I think specifically for the product team, I think the kind of people we work really well with are people who are really focused on the kinds of problems they are trying to solve. That means, you could be very talented and be working on a lot of different things at the same time. But, if you drill it down to distilling one particular skill set that you feel you're particularly good at, describe that to us and what kind of value that you're hoping to bring to Endowus with that skill is kind of like where I would navigate people to. Try to flesh out that story and try to really focus on, like the kind of evidence they can bring to enhance the narrative of that skill set you're trying to bring into the
Mm.
organization. I think for us at this stage, it's not so easy to do it as a fresh grad. You kind of have an expectation that you have a little bit of experience in the industry. You've seen the kinds of problems that can be solved, and you're kind of trying to bring that passion into Endowus. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it sounds like problem-solving ability, and then earlier I also kind of gleaned from the information that you shared, like the ability to rapidly learn and adapt to the situation. That sounds like what
Yeah.
you exactly need in a skill out as well. So wow, I mean, there must be some really, really interesting questions that you ask to kind of like suss that out. So for those of you who are looking to join this scale up called Endowus and join Isaac and his team, these are things to definitely watch out for. Just as a final question, any advice you would give to people trying to enter fintech or even the tech industry in general?
Yeah. So again, it's a very common question we get from students as well, is where do I even begin or like what should I be looking for? And I think it's important to recognize that, I mean, tech is very broad. FinTech itself is very broad. And even within wealth management in general, there's different parts of the value chain that you could situate yourself in. And when we talk again about passion and kind of where you can communicate that, you need to find problems within this value chain or within these industries or sub-industries that you are particularly passionate about in. I mean, I'm not sure how many people are going to say I'm passionate about insurance, but there are like certain parts about insurance or certain aspects about insurance that you can get passionate about, right? Like, how do you make sure that people are getting the right value out of their insurance policy? How do you make sure that the agents that are distributing these policies are acting in the best interest of clients and things like that as well. Um, there's many different areas in which you can drill into and frame your particular interest in and dig deep rather than try to be too broad or too generalized about the industries when trying to enter them, right? So particularly for fintech and particularly for wealth tech, what we kind of deal with is personal finance, right? So when we talk about sort of problems in personal finance, some of it is due to your own financial circumstances. Sometimes it's due to the availability of resources that you have or availability of opportunities to invest in certain products. These are the kind of things that would light up a candidate to us versus someone who's just like, oh yeah, I've heard of you guys before and I've maybe used your app, right? like think about the kind of problems that we deal with in the personal investing space, and then try to bring that energy to companies, to interviews, and
Yeah.
position yourself that way. Yeah.
Yeah, and it sounds like you even need to prepare like how it relates to you on a personal level and tell a story about that to actually show, as you said, rather than just tell that you're into something. Isaac, I think it's been a really wonderful conversation with you and just learning from you, just learning what Endowus is doing. I've always been very curious what goes behind the scenes. You've shared a little bit more this time around. And really looking forward to some of those Gen AI use cases that you guys are working. And hopefully as a customer, I can see that in beta soon. And as well as I think you've also been quite an inspiring figure, sharing more about your mentoring journey as well as how you volunteered for Better.sg, which I'm sure some people might reach out to you. What's the best way to reach out to you? Is LinkedIn okay?
Yeah, LinkedIn is fine. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, just feel free to drop a connection request to Isaac Lee, who works for Endowus, and I'm sure he'll be more than happy to connect with you. And for everyone else who's listening, this is our second last session for the year, and we will have one final session in early December with the head of product design for Naluri, a health tech startup based in Malaysia. Right. So today we covered FinTech. Next month we're going to talk about health tech, and there's a lot of interesting things to also learn about. And thank you so much, Isaac, for spending your time with us today. And for everyone else who's listening, I hope you got something out of it from today's session. Thank you very much, and goodbye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Yeah, bye.